The status of the Department of Education is a distraction from the real debates over the scope and substance of the federal role in K-12 education. The department's unlikely to be eliminated, and even if it were, that would be neither necessary nor sufficient to effect a major change in the federal role. So I think it's important to note at the outset that the federal role in American education long predates the creation of the Department of Education. If you think of the major laws governing the federal role in American education, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the Higher Education Act, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, all of those predate the department's creation. If you look at the broader history of federal involvement in American schools, you don't see a significant jump or increase in federal involvement when the department was opened. So the first thing the Federal Department of Education does is to distribute funds. In K-12, the largest funding streams by far go to school districts to support them in serving economically disadvantaged students and students with disabilities. Altogether, federal funding amounts to about 8 to 10% of total spending on K-12 schools. And then the federal government plays an even larger financial role in higher education through the Pell Grant system and the federal student loan program. The second thing the department does is to issue regulations that govern the use of those funds. They tell schools what they can and can't do with federal dollars, but they also tell them what policies need to be in place in order to receive those funds. So this allows the federal government to play a much larger role in American schools than its limited financial footprint might imply. The third thing the Department of Education does is in its Office of Civil Rights, it's responsible for ensuring that institutions that receive federal funds, both higher ed institutions and K-12 schools, that they abide by the nation's civil rights laws. And then finally, the Department of Education gathers official statistics related to education and supports and conducts, in some cases, education research and development work. If the department's current funding programs and activities were essentially relocated into other agencies like the Department of Labor or the Department of Health and Human Services, then the consequences would be relatively limited. All we're really talking about in that case is a question of bureaucratic organization. If the elimination of the department meant also eliminating its major federal funding streams, then that would be quite consequential. And it is the case that Project 2025, which some observers see as a potential blueprint for the incoming Trump administration, does contemplate the gradual phase out of the largest federal funding streams in K-12 education in particular. And that would be consequential because of the loss of funding. States would need to find ways to make up that gap if they wanted to continue to support urban districts in particular. Even more consequential would be the limited ability of the federal government to impose new regulations on schools nationwide. So I think the Trump administration's initial priority will be higher education. They've inherited a very complicated situation as a result of the Biden administration's efforts to forgive student loans that will require their immediate attention. There also seems to be a lot of interest in Congress in subjecting elite higher education institutions in particular to additional scrutiny around topics like the environment for free expression and open inquiry on campus, the protection of Jewish and Israeli students, for example. Then you might also see the president work with Congress to try to broaden eligibility for Pell Grants and other forms of federal aid for higher education. That could be extending them to apprenticeship programs that traditionally have not been eligible and are more work-aligned. It could also involve efforts to reform the accreditation system that currently acts as the gatekeeper for federal financial aid to create a more open marketplace for the creation of new higher education institutions.